This is a beginning point. This is the beginning of the rest of my life. I got the meaning, and I got to write it down, because I don't want to forget it.
Just win, baby.
Podcast with your hosts, me, Gymnastic, and Connor Donald. Connor, man, how you been?
I am doing great, man. And as you pointed out, you may hear my washer running in the background, my washer and dryer. My kid peed all over our bedding, and we're just trying to get it so that we can sleep tonight on some fresh bedding that doesn't have pee all over it. So I'll try and mute myself and be respectful of the situation. But otherwise, I'm doing great, man. And I'm excited for this episode. But before we get into it, just to let everyone know, make sure to follow Jim at Gold Jacket QBs, me at Connor10. Make sure to follow the entire True North Fantasy Football Network. We're all over the place. Twitter at True North FFB. TNFF Network on YouTube and on the internet, TrueNorthFFB.com. There's some big things planned over the next couple weeks, and of course some huge things planned in season. But enough with the promoting and talking about where to follow us. Let's get right into this. This is another part of our how-to series, and we are going to be talking about how to auction draft. I have no clue what I'm doing. Jim has a slight clue of what he's doing, but we have brought on our resident auctioneer, and he is also a writer for at Dynasty Pros FF, and this is at Fantasy Ladder on Twitter. Steve, welcome aboard.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm really, really, really excited to be here.
We are excited to have you.
All I know about auction is you want to spend your money as fast as possible and then go after dollar store babies is what I like to call them. The $1 babies that fill up the
I'm sure Steve's about to tell you that strategy is not going to win you much.
It can definitely work in a more shallow league, for sure. You definitely want to try to get as much top-end talent in a more shallow, say, 10-team league. Some 8-team leagues still do exist. So that is definitely a viable strategy because a lot of those $1 players are still quite decent, especially if you know what you're doing. So, but the deeper league you get into, 12, 14-team league, I would not advise that. But it can work. It can work for sure. But that's just kind of how I roll. But yeah.
No, I'm just playing.
Well, perfect. Me and Jim are just going to go fire off a bunch of these questions and add some follow-ups to it. And we're going to try and give the listeners as much as humanly possible to know about auction drafting so that they leave this and say, hey, I want to get in an auction draft, and probably with guys like me and Jim so that they can win. But let's start off with probably the simplest question. What are auction draft leagues, and how do they differ from the fantasy leagues that are out there, say like best ball or dynasty leagues or season long?
Yeah, so the biggest difference is in how the draft is orchestrated. In your typical snake draft, that is the format that is followed through most dynasty startups, although you can do auction and dynasty startups. But pretty much the main difference is that instead of a draft order, you get your draft slot first or fifth or ninth or whatever, you are given a nomination order. So everything is just very open-ended rather than just being pigeonholed to your one little spot. Then you wait for your turn, then you pick, and then you wait again, and then you pick. This could be, you could pick all 15 guys first in a row if that's how it works out. But it, probably not going to work out that way in most cases. But the draft order versus the nomination order would be the biggest difference in how the draft is completed.
Like it. Now, I have a quick question here. Is there like a certain amount of people that you can nominate at one time, or like how does that work? Do you have to win a nomination to nominate a second player? To bid up a player? How does that work?
typically what'll happen is whoever has the first nomination will just put a player up. It can be any position, any price point, just any player. And then it's just open to whoever gives the highest bid or the highest offer will win that player. But then you just stay true to that nomination order, similar to the draft slot of a snake league or of a snake draft, I should say, because there is some strategy that can come in with who you nominate and when. So you want to make sure you get your turn to get someone up for bid.
I like that. How did you get into auction drafts? Like,
my longest running league, what you would call like your home league, right? We're entering into our 16th season. 10 years ago, we made the switch to auction from Snake, pretty much around the concept that every drafter has the equal opportunity at every available player from the get-go. Because there would be a lot of these frustrations of, well, we just pick out of a hat and your draft slot is what it is. So if you're like fifth, there's no way you're going to get the top, player of that season. Say it would be like Christian McCaffrey this year. You have to get really, really lucky in order to make that happen. In auction, you just have an opportunity to kind of create your own luck. You just have a lot more control. It's a much more like empowering experience as a drafter. So our home league, back to that, we always try to tweak our rules and our process just to make it more fair, keep the competitive nature as strong as possible. And we settled on trying to do an auction, and we just haven't looked back because it's just been such a positive boost in getting the competition up.
I actually really like that concept and that idea behind it, because it definitely gives everybody an equal opportunity. And I kind of like that idea over, like, say, a keeper league or something. That definitely gives everybody more of an equal playing field, and it doesn't put people in a position where they're out some of the top names because people keep them, or vice versa. So I definitely like that.
Yeah, a couple things can happen when you do a snake. It can be frustrating just being pigeonholed into your one little spot, and already a lot of your fate has been determined, right? And then between your picks, there can be these like position runs where you get 9 like running backs in a row. Then it's like a less than optimal choice when your turn comes around. And we can't forget about the horrible snipe. That just does not happen in an auction league. The only reason why you wouldn't get a player that you desire is just because you chose not to draft them, or you just passed because it didn't fit your budget. So you just have way more control over the situation to a certain degree. You just don't have to kind of sit on your hands and wait for something to fall in your lap. You can just kind of make it up. You can kind of do it yourself. So I just like that as someone who takes this game very seriously. And I think anyone who puts in all this prep and all this effort into trying to better themselves in the fantasy football world, like, why wouldn't you want to have the opportunity to have more control over the team that you can put together?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And you're definitely speaking to the people who pick at like 1, 2, and 11 and 12, where you're forced to pick a guy a lot earlier than you would like to, or you're forced to say, well, I guess I'm going to miss out on these people because I know that I'm not going to be back around for whatever it is, like 23 picks or whatever. So I definitely agree with that. That is definitely a cool concept and a cool way to look at it. And it does definitely make it a lot fairer, a more balanced approach to having your opportunity at everyone. And it's either somebody went crazy with the pricing, or you just didn't want to pay that price, and that's why you lose out on a person. It's all basically left on you that you missed out on someone. So I really like that. In Dynasty and Redraft, we look at ADP, or average draft position, as an evaluation of value for a player. What tools do you use in an auction draft to determine a fair value on a specific player?
So aside from making my own personal rankings, I will start at the site that is hosting the draft if it is an online draft. Our home league meets in person, so it's just completely, everyone just has their own ordeal. But in order to get a starting point for the values, we play our league through ESPN. So I'll go on ESPN, do a couple ESPN mocks, or look at their cheat sheet central page to pull up just what their projected values are. So that'll be the starting point, because that is just how a lot of our league mates that'll just be the first place they go. But then I'll check out, say, CBS. I'll check out Sleeper. I'll see what their draft rooms suggest for these prices and these players. And then I'll compare maybe some of those averages or some of those numbers, maybe the ones that stick out to me, to my own rankings, and then sort of formulate it that way of what to expect versus what I think is just like a good balance to have during the actual draft.
I like what you just touched on there, where you said your league's on ESPN, so you go there first, and that's where most of your league's going to go first. I love that, and I think more people need to know their league. That's a valuable trait that like a lot of people miss out on. Like, just know where they're going to get their information from. Then at least a little bit about the battle that you're going to face, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So the other thing Connor briefly touched on there was, he goes, one reason that you might not get a guy is because you bid him up too high, or a guy bid him up too high. Is that a potential strategy that you've seen at all, where you see a guy heavily overbid a guy just to get his price up, and then hoping, like, say like a Saquon Barkley, like really quick, if you had like $100 budget, putting him up to like 65, knowing somebody hopefully is going to go to 66 or 67 and take their entire budget down with the one guy, right? Like, is that a strategy you've seen?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to knowing your league and knowing their tendencies. So like in our league, we do have a Giants fan. And every year he'll try to reach on these Giants players. So it's just great. But you really have to watch it. I typically don't advise doing that, because then you get stuck with the guy. And it might work out, but I just typically would say don't price enforce just to try to play chicken with someone else. It doesn't always work out. And again, it could work out for you, but I would rather exercise some discipline and not and potentially give my league mate a deal, rather than blow a lot of money on a position that I don't need just to kind of try to screw him over. I just would that would be ill advised. But there are strategies in terms of who to nominate and when. So I will definitely try to put up a player that I know is like especially hot, that say I don't have tremendous interest in. Let's just use Kyle Pitts as an example. He'll go he's just a very hype player right now. He could potentially go for an expected cost of like, I don't know. I would have him right now like tight end, I think 5 or 6 for redraft purposes. But he may go as like a tight end 3 price. So if I know that he is just going to go like way more than what I'm willing to pay, I might throw that up early, and then that's just a way to also test the market as well. See who's really going to be going after him, and getting that final result. If it's way more than I was willing to pay for, but then that's less money on the board that I have to worry about. So it's kind of a win-win. So there is definitely a strategy in putting up a player of that nature, specifically to try to get money off the board. But a guy like that, I would be afraid he would go for way more than I would be willing to spend on him, just personally. But yeah,
I can tell you that auction drafting sounds ridiculously frustrating. For some people, it could be something that really gets like your blood pressure like through the roof, because you'd be going for someone and someone drives the value up, or the nomination doesn't go as expected, and really. But I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds like it's a lot more about you and how you want to do it, and really creating a strategy that works for you. Like we talk about strategies, when we're talking about dynasty leagues and you talk about robust RBs or zero RBs. But I feel like you can really put more of a personal touch on it in an auction draft for how you really want your team to come out and how you really, when you really want to strike on certain players, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, that's right. So going into the auction, I'll try to have a percent of the budget that I'm willing to spend on each position. So, a certain percent I want to spend on the quarterback, a certain percent I want to spend on tight end, a certain percent with like wide receiver and running back. The breakdown that I like to use is like roughly, 10% on QB, roughly 10% on tight end, roughly 40 on running back and 40 on wide receiver. Then you see how the draft goes and then you adjust accordingly. So if you see a quarterback that you especially like go for well less than, say, 10% of what you planned for, say goes for 6%, you can now reallocate that extra 4% to like a running back. Maybe now you feel a little bit more confident spending a little bit more on a running back that you weren't actually planning on. So there is a lot you have to juggle, a lot you have to scan, but having that initial budget and plan in place beforehand just will really serve you well. I definitely feel like I can go into a snake draft and just wing it way more easily than I can at auction. But it's also important to realize that the draft is just the foundation of the team. It is not everything. I do agree with that chat comment. Snake draft is checkers, and auction is absolutely chess. It is just like a higher level of thinking and strategizing for sure. Like I said a moment ago, it just becomes a much more rewarding experience for someone who really puts the work in. So yeah, definitely coming in with a solid plan, but being willing to pivot how you want to take things. You just have to be that is of the utmost important in an auction, because there is no downtime. You could have personal stake in every single player potentially. So you're not going to want to blink. So yeah, the intensity of it can definitely be up. Like you said about the blood pressure, it can absolutely rise in that kind of draft compared to a snake, because you can just sit back and grab a beer because you're not going to have a pick for another 12 picks or something. That's just not going to happen in an auction, because at any point you could get a nice bargain on a player for sure.
Speaking of bargains, do you find the beginning of an auction draft or near the end of an auction draft, like, is there a spot where you find more value, where you can hit a couple studs? Like, I don't know, like I've been in a couple where I've seen what you think is an outrageous price for an RB, but then as the draft goes on, you're like, shit, I wish I should have grabbed, like Joe Mixon for the price he ended up going for, because all these other guys are going for way more and they're a tier less. Or do you find like, you get some big studs at near the end of a draft because everybody's allocated their budget fast and furious now?
Right. So it's very tricky because the nomination orders can be just so unique. You can go from, like a mid-tier tight end to a top-tier quarterback to a low-tier wide receiver to a top-tier running back. So it could be all over the place. But to answer your question, what I have found is if you nominate a mid-tiered, say, running back, that actually might be the best chance to get them at a better price, because people might not want to spend as much money on like a running back too. When you have all these other top end talent still available on the board, you could actually get someone like Mixon for maybe like $10 less, because people don't want to pounce on it just yet. But you don't want to wait too late either, because if it's just like down to you and like three other people who have all the money, you're just kind of going back and forth, you could miss out on your opportunity to get that $1 value, because it'll be just down to like the three of you picking like consecutively until you eventually fill up your rosters. So I would say earlier the better, but there is a balance of the level of talent, because say my top running backs go McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Saquon. But I may want to nominate Cook because he's kind of in between the two. If I feel like Cook is going at a price that's well below that I think McCaffrey is going to go at, then I'm solid. Then McCaffrey may be nominated. He may go for way more because now there's that urgency at the position because there's less at the position, and the quality is also getting thinner. So McCaffrey could go for what he goes for. Then people may realize, oh crap, well now Barkley is the last one in this tier. So if I want to get a top guy, well now I may have to overpay. Then I'm looking good because I got the much lower price on Cook because he went first of that group. And then like that urgency now has been established, and that can make some people panic a little bit. But a very savvy drafter will already have these tiers in place, and the tighter the better. So you don't get so overwhelmed. You can still go down to the next level and still feel pretty good in those moments there.
I like it. It sounds like there's really a lot of different strategies, and it's all dependent upon a specific person to what type of strategy they want to delve into. How would you recommend to someone who's maybe a first timer? What would your recommendation be to start a strategy, to start building a strategy? Where would you find the right research to really start building up a strategy from the ground up if you've never done this before?
Yeah, one strategy that I would recommend, like say a first timer in their first mock, would be a more balanced with patience approach. In this approach, you would purposefully not bid on the first like 20 to 30 players that are nominated. Because what you'll be able to do in that time that you're waiting is kind of gauge the market, see where these different positions are going for, and then you could actually get a decent amount of bargains, but also load up on like mid-round talent. So that's what I would say. I like play a little game with myself. I try to create a draft or create a roster that would be impossible to recreate in a snake draft. So instead of just picking between just Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb, why not both? If I'm trying to pick between one of Antonio Gibson, Austin Eckler, and Swift, why not all three? So you can definitely play around with it, but I will go with the balanced and patience, because really gauging the market will help determine how it's best wise to spend your money and on what positions. So.
I like it. Makes sense. Kind of like the economy class in high school there, right? Economics, where you learn how to balance a budget a little bit. I don't know if they still do that. I think I was one of the last ones doing it. And I probably failed based on what I'm doing in my bank accounts.
Gotcha.
So let's move this along, and we'll play a little game that we like to play here called Gold or Fool's Gold, where we're just going to ask you for so far what you've seen a gold quarterback, which is somebody that's going to give you good positional value and be a stud at the position, and then a fool's gold, who's somebody you're probably going to overpay for and disappoint based on the value you had to take them in drafts.
Gotcha. So at quarterback, there's a tier that I really like. Just for fun, I just did my same process. I pulled up the ESPN cheat sheet where they have like a recommended number or salary cap price. They have a tier that begins with Ryan Tannehill, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Matthew Stafford. They are all $2 or less quarterbacks. This year, they actually have more reasonable quarterback prices where Mahomes kind of starts at $10, which is actually really not bad at all. I just tend to wait on QB, so I'm looking for the highest upside possible for the less amount of money. So with Tannehill, Hurts, Burrow, and Stafford, I think the four of those tier have upside for different reasons. Tannehill and Hurts have the rushing upside. Tannehill obviously has like really good pass catchers in Julio Jones and AJ Brown, of course. Burrow, he could honestly just throw the ball like 45 times a game. He could just like light it up through the air. And same with Stafford. He's got a really good coach and weapons around him as well. Same sort of logic applies to the running back for me. Obviously, you don't want to miss out on top talent, but what I am looking for are guys that I can get very cheaply that I think have potential to take over an ambiguous backfield, such as Damian Harris, such as a Trey Sermon. Both of these guys right now are valued for $2. Well, I think Trey Sermon is $1. Trey Sermon's $1.
I love Trey.
I really think, and I like Mostert too, but I think that Sermon could easily take over that backfield, especially down the stretch. And for $1, you are going to be looking really, really pretty later on in the year. A wide receiver, similar thing. Some of the guys at the top, you really don't want to pass up on because they just have like such a solid situation. Say Tyreek Hill, he's definitely like he's a massive playmaker. He's got Mahomes. He's set. But a little bit later on, I just like to look for the cheapest possible player that could return the most opportunity and points. So right now, a guy like Russell Gage, a $1 player, could even be considered a $0 player that you can just get as the last guy on your bench, and he could be like second or third in targets for the Falcons this year. Well, I would say third in that offense. That just is going to air the ball out a lot. But even in that Jerry Jeudy, Samuel Debo tier, a lot of those guys are like $5, $6, $7 players where you can just load up on them and get a lot of top running backs. You can really play around with it nicely. And that tight end, for me, the real sweet spot is Dallas Goedert. He's valued at $5 right now on ESPN, and I believe $4 on Sleeper. So between the two of those, that's pretty consistent across the board wherever you may be drafting. I just think he could really pop this year. Just a lot of upside, and and the Eagles may defensively struggle, so they may have opportunity to be in some shootouts, or at least have a positive game script for the passing, or a negative game script to help the passing game some. So definitely get Dallas Goedert at that price point, I believe is probably the best bet to go, because after him, some of the price points are the same, but just not as nice of a situation. I would also throw in Noah Fant into that mix. Just saw that he's valued at $1 on ESPN, and he is actually 5 spots lower on their rankings compared to my personal rankings. So he's 11th on ESPN. I would have him 6th, or I would have him 7th. Sorry. So for me, that is like a no-brainer. But just generally speaking, Dallas Goedert lined up pretty well overall.
So it sounds like there's a lot of value in situation with auction draft. I mean, I know it's the same in Dynasty per se or redraft per se, but it sounds like you really want to find someone with a good opportunity who's going to be a cheap value or an attempted cheap value. Because, obviously in Dynasty, you're looking for who's going to be the future stud, because you're looking for that guy that you're drafting who's going to take over an offense, like the Kyle Pitts type situation. You talk about the hype that's built behind Kyle Pitts. The Julio Jones trade, just the rocket has left the Earth's atmosphere. It's heading towards Mars, like uncontrollably right now with him. So it sounds like it's all about finding someone like a Russell Gage, or someone who maybe even maybe Mike Davis could be an example on the running back side of the ball, where they're going to have a ton of opportunity, but they're going to come very cheap compared to someone who you might have to invest a lot more money in.
That's right. Yeah. So on the Fool's Gold side of things, I am just one to wait on tight end and wait on quarterback. So I'm usually not going to be drafting the top end quarterbacks or tight ends. So in this case, I put in Mahomes and Kelce, both of them. Kelce is valued at $50. So in a $200 budget, that is 1/4 of your budget at a tight end position. He obviously is fantastic, but that is not how I want to approach the draft, I would like to acquire Kelsey Moore via trade, like halfway through the year. So I just wouldn't even consider unless the price was like phenomenally lower than that. As far as the quarterbacks go, I really love the top 6, and that's a really strong group, but just comes down to that price point. If I miss out on the top 6, I'm definitely going to be targeting, as I said before, Jalen Hurts or even Daniel Jones. He's another one. He's another like $1 quarterback that I feel that I could have enough confidence in as my starter. On the running back side, for me, the fool's gold is definitely Joe Mixon, and this is based on the ESPN sheet. They have him ranked RB12, $41. For me, he's more like RB17. So for the price point there, I'm not going to spend that kind of money on him. But I may, like I said before, with that nomination strategy, I may put him out there to get that extra money off the board on a player that I just don't believe I have that much interest in, unless the bid stops around 25, 26. If I can get like a $10 plus bargain on them, well, then I can justify that, because that's more in my price range. But at full value there, that's just going to be someone I'm just absolutely going to be passing on. Another one is like David Johnson, a much lower price point, only $2-3. But that's just like a roster spot that I would feel is wasted on just a backfield that could just be a total disaster, a total nightmare with all the pieces there. And I just don't know if they're going to win a single game. I just think the quality of touches is going to be so poor. But say David Johnson goes for $3, as I mentioned before, with Damian Harris, Trey Sermon, even guys like Gus Edwards, who are all going for $1 a piece. I would much rather have those $3 players, because that will up my average cost per player on the rest of my roster. So even for a $2 difference, that's how much of a difference it can make as far as how much you're able to spend per on average for the rest of your roster spots. Wide receiver right now, I am absolutely avoiding Davante Adams until I know what's happening with Aaron Rodgers. I am not going to spend top dollar on him, even though he's fantastic. It just isn't going to happen for me. The wide receiver position is way too deep. I'd rather have a chunk of $20 to $15 players, or even like a handful in the $25 to $22 range. That would be like your Allen Robinsons, your Keenan Allens, Adam Thielens, guys in that group. I'd rather have 3 of those than Davante. Well, until the things become more clear, I'd rather have a group of those in a much more firm situation than spend, $40+ on a Davante Adams. And then, someone I just couldn't do that right now. But obviously we'll have to see how things play out. But if I'm drafting today, he's just another one of these guys like Joe Mixon that I'll just put out. And if a lot of money goes off the board, well, then that's even better for me. That's less money that I have to worry about being spent elsewhere. So,
quick question for you: when you do nominate, what is a usual nomination price point? Do you start off with the dollar babies, or do you push a guy like Joe Mixon right off the bat to like $15, $18? Like get a good price on him right away. What's your strategy with that?
I typically will just start at $1, and then will slowly start to build. But there is a point to be made once, because the more players you draft, your potential max bid lowers and lowers and lowers, because it goes by the average of how many. Your max bid is the most amount of money you can spend on a single player minus the amount of roster spots you have left. So you could technically, if it's a $200 budget, if you have 15 roster spots to fill, the max bid could be $185, which is not advised, but still you could do that. And then you just have 14 $1 players. But when my max bid is down to like 7 or 8, if it's a player that I think is worth that, I will absolutely throw that, $7, $8, even $12 figure out there just to show a little bit more aggressiveness in trying to pursue that player. And that can really pay off, especially if you're scanning what the rest of your competition has left. Like if your max bid is 12 and everyone else's is like 7, 8, if I do 8, it's done because no one else can bid up, so you can just kind of use that to your advantage. And that might make more sense in like a keeper league where you can, use your price and average it to like next year's price kind of a thing. But that's kind of perhaps a discussion for another day. But yeah, I will absolutely will have a nomination of a price more than $1, but I'd just like to start at $1 because if everyone snoozes, well, then I got a player for $1, but that doesn't happen either.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Of a lot of strategy near the end there, right? Where you gotta know your league mates' budgets for sure. Puts a little bit more thought into it later on, right? Where a lot of people are just kind of tuning out in the traditional snake draft where you're hitting round 15 not 15, like 22, right? You know what I mean? People are just like, whatever. I'm just gonna auto draft this guy and just put no thought into it. Where you can still get some good deals.
Right.
This has been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Just something for people. I know you're at Fantasy Ladder on Twitter. He's definitely a follow if you want to learn a bit more about auction draft or see some tweeting about auction drafts. But who are some other people that you would recommend as a follow on Twitter, or maybe a site that you check out that you have a lot of trust in, or that maybe got you into auction drafts in general?
Yeah. So I've only been trying my hand at fantasy football for a little under a year now. But in my early days, I was trying to beat the drum for a lot of the auction talk. And very early on, I connected with another account called Fantasy Auction Nuts. They have their own podcast, and they would be posting a lot of their draft results. And it just was like beautiful to see. They just have like a very similar approach that I do, and they would have a very nice discussion based on their mock drafts and other mock drafts that they like better in their own drafts that they hosted. So they have a podcast and they have a handbook. It's like a 40 page document. It's extremely affordable to check out, where they really break down their approach and how they break things down. So I'd highly recommend checking out Fantasy Auction Nuts, their podcast and their handbook.
Beautiful.
Love it.
Beautiful.
That is great. And one final thing, what's your final parting words to anyone who's thinking about stepping into auction? Sounds like you definitely need to be focused. You definitely have to be willing to build a strategy and really put a little bit extra homework and elbow grease into it than just going into like a dynasty league and just starting a startup draft and running through 22 rounds. It can take up to 8 hours for each pick. So what would be your final parting words, biggest recommendations to those who after this show are like chomping at the bit to join auction drafts?
So what I'll say is, when our home league made the decision to make the switch from snake to auction, I have found in myself that I have definitely improved as a fantasy football player, because you have to really value the specific players, not just the range of players in a round. So I have found a lot of personal growth in how I approach the game and in how I play the game, but also just to remind just about the basic concepts of why I feel it's just a superior method, because you have a shot at every player. You literally can't get sniped. You will not wait. It'll require a lot more energy, and I think it's just a lot more fun. But definitely have to practice. You have to practice a lot more and prep more. But I just think you're going to be doing the prep and you're going to be playing anyway, so you might as well spend a little bit more extra time and just kind of enjoy it. But yeah, definitely driving home the fact that everyone has a shot at every player, and just a lot of those frustrations of a snake draft are just very different, and they just don't exist. It's just a totally different experience. I would just say, just try it out and see how you like it.
Love
I like it.
You got anything else, Jim?
Well, I just wanted to say this has been a great talk about auction drafts. For a real quick second, though, I want to talk about best ball in the Canadian National Best Ball Champions League. We were graciously enough afforded to give away a spot, and the Gold Jacket podcast has decided that if you give us a 5-minute hockey style interview, because this year's CNBBCL is the original 6 for the hockey NHL, you give us an original 5-minute, 2 to 5 minute video of why you deserve to be in here. Funniest one hockey style is going to get their shot right now. Remember, that's the CNBBCL where champions play. Live signups are right now at ebestballchampionships@gmail.com.
Love it. I definitely can't wait. We've chosen to take a different approach than lip syncing. As much as everyone loves to lip sync, you can get a little more creative. And the one rule that we have to make sure is stressed here is you have to be Canadian. Right now, it is strictly Canadian. So unfortunately,
that first C stands for Canadian.
I mean, there's no honorary Canadians here. You kind of gotta have that citizenship, dual citizenship. We may have to bring Will Harris in for consideration on what to do in that circumstance, but that would require showing some pretty private documents. So that is your call for sure. But definitely, Steve, this has been awesome, and this was a really good chat. And you definitely got me pretty hyped up about auction drafts. They sound fun. Before we came on the air, I told you about my experience with baseball, and you guys both said baseball sucks. So maybe it's a lot better with football. Maybe I got to give it a fair shake with football and find some people to get involved in with that. But otherwise, thank you everybody for listening. If you're listening on the podcast or watching, if you're watching tonight or watching later on, please make sure to rate, review, like, or comment wherever you're listening or watching. We're always looking to improve this show. I know that we have a final how-to series coming up on, I believe it's July 6th. We're going to be talking Devi with Brandon Lejeune, one of my favorite Devi guys out there. So that'll definitely be a good one. And next week, I can't even remember what we even talked about, Jim, but we are doing something. It's just me and Jim. It's just going to be me and Jim. I don't think we have a guest lined up. And I think we're going to be talking some about value picks or something like that. We'll figure it out. It's a mess now, but it all comes together. But Steve, thank you so much. You can be followed at Fantasy Ladder on Twitter. Any final things you want to say to the listeners about what you might be working on, where else they might be able to find you?
Yeah, as you mentioned off the top, I do write articles for Dynasty Pros Fantasy Football, and I will have a pretty extensive article coming out specifically about auction drafting. So we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper into some of the strategies and trying to ease some of the hangups that people have with that. But yeah, I typically will write a weekly article for Dynasty Pros. We got a lot of really great stuff coming out now. We're doing a series on 10 Dynasty buys and 10 Dynasty sells amongst the group of writers that we have. So be on the lookout for that.
Love it. And you showed your shirt off, and we completely forgot to shout out Viridian Global. Jim's is rocking the new Scott Fishbowl gear tonight. They are the official sponsor for the clothing sponsor for the Scott Fishbowl. Get all your gear there. I know that Will and Master June have worked their ass off for like months on that gear. So definitely get in there, buy some gear. It's all for charity. It all goes back to the Fantasy Cares, any profit. So definitely do that. And you can follow me at Connor10 on Twitter and follow Jim at Gold Jacket QBs on Twitter as well. And of course, the entire True North Fantasy Football crew at True North FFB, TrueNorthFFB.com, and hit subscribe on TNFF Network on YouTube. We have some great stuff happening this year. 5 nights a week of shows. We're gonna have DFS shows. We're gonna have the Gold Jacket podcast. We're gonna have the OGs, Travis and Ty, and so much more coming this year. But that is it for us this week. And until next Tuesday, we will see you next week.